And good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to the June 2014 webinar and concurrent seminar here at UL Laboratories from the Smart Grid Educational Series. Today I have a pretty lengthy presentation and there's a lot of information, so I'm going to get started right away and allow you to ask lots of questions at the end. This presentation today, the main purpose of the presentation is to first introduce the electric industry to all of you. Many of you work in the industry, many of you are interested in the electric industry, but do not have enough of the facts to understand what the opportunities and challenges are in this industry. So one of my purposes of this presentation is to provide you an overview of the industry. And the second one is to look at the financial health of the electric industry, especially after the stimulus funding has now run out essentially or has already been appropriated. The question is, where are we going from here? So to understand the health of utilities and then start thinking about what business opportunities exist to collaborate with the utility industry. Now the electric industry or the electric sector is a much larger community than just utilities. But my focus today is on utilities as a place where you can transact business. And then I'll provide you some recommendations on what are some good practices of engaging with the utility industry that will improve your chances of doing business with them. It's about understanding their culture. So that's basically it, an overview of the industry, understanding the financial health of utilities, and then some recommendations on how you should engage in business. My purpose for doing all of this is to help grow the market for the electric sector. We have gotten so used to just waiting for handouts from the government, whether it's state or federal, and then we know how to spend that money. We've become experts at that. But the problem is, if you're going to borrow from China and then just spend that money, that's not sustainable. We're mortgaging our country to put technology out there, a lot of which is not really used. So the big part of the purpose of this presentation is to encourage the private sector to engage in more productive dialogue with the utility industry and create proper public-private partnerships, not just doing lip service, but actual public-private partnership, where money comes from both sides, not to do just cost shares on DOE RFPs, but I'm talking about a sustainable model. So it's a lot, but I'm going to start, and that's why I call it part one. And I'm going to be doing 2 other presentations over the summer in this area, getting deep into the issues and helping you and helping myself engage with the utility industry in more productive ways. The agenda, first we're going to provide an overview of the industry, and then I'm going to hone in on the top 20 investor-owned utilities, and I rank them by market cap. And then I'll talk about the 20 municipal power companies that have the largest sale in megawatt hours. And then I'm going to talk about electric co-ops. And the electric co-ops I'm going to focus on are the ones that have at least 50,000 customers or more. And then I'm going to get into the financials. So here on Monday I sat with Yahoo Finance and I analyzed the 20 companies, the top 20 companies, to look at their financials and understand from that how to engage with them in business and determine what their priorities are going to be, economic priorities. Then I'm going to talk about the constraints of IOUs, munis, and co-ops. You cannot engage in business with a client unless you know their pain. then you talk about how you relieve that pain. But if you just come with medicine when there is no ailment of that type, that does not lead to good business. So I'm going to highlight some of those constraints for you. And then I'm going to really get down to the nitty-gritty and recommend best practices on how you engage with utilities that will pique their interest. And not all utilities are the same, not only by geographical distribution, but also the type of utility. So I'm going to get into that. And then we'll have conclusions and Q&A. I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation would not be possible without a lot of information coming from the Energy Industry Association that provides me a lot of information on power and energy usage in the electric sector and how it's sold and how much is sold. And then the websites of these organizations provide very rich information. And I went through these websites and picked up things that I think are going to be relevant for your needs. And then images available on the internet for various topics. Let's get into what the electric industry is about. So you cannot really do much in the electric sector unless you know these organizations, because they affect how you will do business with this industry. FERC is the regulatory body, that's the federal agency. NERC is the private organization that enforces the policies that FERC comes up with. But remember, the focus of NERC and FERC is on bulk power systems. So we're talking about 300 megawatts or larger, and primarily on generation and transmission. Of course, with the advent of smart grid and demand response and the concept of megawatts, one can imagine that there could be energy service companies that could cross that threshold by providing savings of 300 megawatts or more. And there's still a debate on how FERC and NERC are going to be involved in that. But in the traditional electric sector, if you are involved in business of 300 megawatts or more, you have to comply with NERC SIP, SIP meaning Critical Infrastructure Protection Guidelines, and FERC creates a lot of the policy. But this is also about interstate transmission of electricity and how you regulate that. And then the public utility commissions are state organizations, and those primarily focus on regulating distribution companies, and in that, mostly publicly owned distribution companies. I'm talking about investor-owned utilities. So please learn about these organizations, go to their websites. If it's a PUC, go to the specific state's PUC and look at it. I adapted this from the mission statement of CPUC since I'm here in California, but every state in the United States has some kind of regulatory body like that. Now let's talk about the three types of utilities. You have investor-owned utilities, or IOUs. These are privately held, so they are shares, and there are owners of those shares, and they have a board, and they make decisions on how to invest the money that they raise from the shareholder value, money that they borrow, grants that they get from state and federal government, and other financial instruments. The CPUC in California regulates the major IOUs here, PG&E, Southern California Edison, San Diego Gas and Electric, but PUCs in any other state will regulate the IOUs, especially the distribution part of the IOUs. Municipal power means that you have city government that will own assets of, some may even have generation assets, and the distribution within the city to the customer. The city government either appoints a board or the city council manages, oversees this. So the city manager and the board of supervisors are overseeing this utility. But it's a publicly owned utility. The city owns them. And then you have electric co-ops. Electric co-ops came about because initially when electricity was distributed in the United States, the companies, the privately held companies said it's not worth our while to go into those small towns and villages and out in the open farm. And it wasn't very profitable for them. But people lived there and they needed electricity for the mechanization of farming and for their living. So during FDR's time, we had these co-ops be developed with some help from the federal government. And that has made a huge difference because now, even though there may be 7 or 8 miles between two customers in a rural area, the cooperative is there and it's held by the members. So imagine the people who live in suburban areas and farm areas, they actually own the utility themselves. That's why it's called a co-op. And it's regulated by a board that is appointed by the members. Now let's get into this concept of a regional transmission organization and an ISO. So if you've ever seen a Ford Taurus or a Mercury Sable, and you always wondered what the difference between those two vehicles was. For years, they used to manufacture both of them, and I could never figure it out. When I saw RTO and ISO, I had a deja vu. I'm like, there's that Ford Taurus and Mercury Sable all over again. They're very subtle differences, and you have to get a law degree almost to figure out what those differences are. But generally, these are independent organizations that are established to provide a marketplace for electricity, a stable marketplace, and also oversee that the transmission grid in their jurisdiction is stable. Those are the two primary functions. The RTOs have a little more responsibility on the actual infrastructure than an ISO does, but there's a lot of overlap. So if you look at the list of ISOs and RTOs, some will be purely ISOs, some will be purely RTOs, some of them will be ISO and RTO both. So like Cal ISO, from what I understand, is both. But I would like you to visit the website for ISOs and RTOs out on the internet and learn the differences are really subtle. But just remember that it is on the bulk transmission system and it is meant for maintaining a market, an energy market. So that whether you're a small producer of electricity or large, you have access to the market and you can sell your electricity. This shows you the evolution of the demand for electricity, how it has grown from 1949 here up to 2009. So over a 60-year period, you can see a dramatic increase in the installed capacity on our grid. We have over 1,000 gigawatts of power now. And the consumption in terawatt hours per year is also been steadily growing to where we have a little over 11 billion kilowatt hours per day in 2013. Now let's do our math. If there are 300 million people and there's 11 billion, right? So we're talking about 33 kilowatt hours per person per day. Now that's not really true at the residential level. But think about the whole gross domestic product, all the products that you eat and you buy and everything you do, all of that requires electric energy. So that composite is the 36 kilowatt hours per person per day, even though you may be using 1 kilowatt hour. But the other 35 is being used all over the place. So understand that what this does to the industry when there's such a demand for electricity. And it makes sense as our lives are becoming increasingly electrified. We're consuming more electricity, then we need more and more sources to produce that energy. Now let's see some facts about the electric sector. We have over 450,000 miles of transmission lines that are above 69 kilovolts. Now, if 25,000 miles means a trip around the world. How many times can you go around the world? 18 times with the wires that we just have in the United States. That is phenomenal. 200,000 of those miles are greater than 230 kilovolts. We have some 15,700 transmission substations. Those are pretty large facilities. That's where that step down occurs or where the splitting occurs of the transmission line. That's a lot of substations. I don't think we have that many colleges and universities probably in the United States as we have transmission substations. About 6% average loss in T&D, 2% in transmission, 4 to 5% in distribution. This does not account for the non-technical losses, theft kind of losses. And there are some areas that have more of that than other areas. This is especially a problem in third world countries, where the actual T&D loss is not much, but when you account for the non-technical loss, it can be north of 40%. And that has to be recovered somehow. And the way it's recovered is those who legally pay their bills have to pay for all of that. So it's just like uninsured motorist protection kind of thing. All right, this table here shows you the distribution by the utility type. A lot of us don't know this, but there are over 2,000 publicly owned utilities across the United States, and some of them are really small, like they'll have 100 or 200 customers. There are not that many IOUs. There are 192, almost one per country in the world. Right? There are about 192 countries in the world. Co-ops, 871. But look at the disproportionate share that IOUs have of the megawatts sold. That is 1.97 million megawatt hours sold. So it's almost a little over 3-to-1 ratio with publicly owned. So while you have over 2,000 of those and only 192 of the IOUs, that 10-to-1 ratio? But when it comes to the energy sold, the IOUs are more than 3 times than all the public utilities combined, publicly owned utilities. And then the co-ops are 871, but have only 404,000 megawatt hours in a year. So this gives you an idea why everyone is chasing the IOUs all day long, every day. And there's nothing wrong in chasing them, but understand that that's the reason. Like when you say, I have a high probability of making a good sale, and I have a choice between a small co-op or a muni or a big IOU, people intuitively think, oh, let's go for the IOU. And that's why you hear the same mantra over. There are like 10 or 15 utilities you hear about over and over again. Every subtle issue that they have, you hear about them. But there are many co-ops and munis that are out there that also have needs. And part of my presentation's purpose today is to highlight that, so that when you go out to sell your products and services, make sure you include them. But this gives you an idea of how the spread occurs. And if you look at the generation, you can see again how disproportionate the representation of generation is also in the IOUs. So even though there are all these vast areas of the United States that are not held in the service territories of IOUs, because their population densities are low, they don't have that much of a share of either the electricity generated or consumed, as IOUs do, that focus a lot on metro areas. This gives you an idea of the power distribution by fuel choice. And I want you to focus on solar here and see what a small percentage of the overall grid power this is. Now, this is not including residential PV, but I'm just showing you that out of over 1,000 gigawatts, how little solar is and how long a journey it is for solar to get anywhere compared to these other huge contributors, namely coal, natural gas, nuclear, and hydro. Wind exists, it's about 5%, but remember, this is power. This is not energy. Wind disappears all of a sudden. For hours and hours, it's gone. So this is just to show you the capacity. Then, let's look at the energy mix. Notice, look at the difference. Here, nuclear is 9.25% of the overall power, but it is 19% of the energy. How does that happen? The way that happens is because it's part of base load. It runs all day long, every day, just like coal does, just like hydro does. And as a result, they have a much larger percentage of the overall energy mix than they do of the power mix. Notice natural gas, it was at 42% of the power, but it's only 30% of the energy because a lot of the peaker units are natural gas, so they don't run all day long. Remember that all the talk about carbon footprint and about cost eventually is from this pie chart, not the previous one. Power is important, but it's the energy that will impact the future of this planet. So start thinking about how, whether you want to bring in a new source of energy or you want to modify some, understand the overall picture so that you know what space you're playing in. And you see here the petroleum, how small a percentage it is. It's only 1%. Petroleum used to be much higher in the 50s and 60s and all the way into the early 70s till the oil embargo occurred. And the price of oil shot up, and it had a huge inflationary impact on our country. And so utilities started migrating away. And if you look, natural gas consumption also dropped during that time. The reason why I'm bringing that up is that I personally do not believe that natural gas is a through street. You know how when you drive and you see it says not a through street, you start making preparations for a U-turn somewhere. So while today it's really inexpensive and it's abundant and there is fracking and shale and all kinds of creative things are happening, understand that when you have a global market for natural gas, the price can be very volatile. And if 86% of the production cost of electricity from a natural gas plant is the fuel, imagine if the fuel price became volatile, what impact it will have. So those who are strong advocates for renewable energy, solar and wind, look for another dance partner than natural gas. It's not going to dance with you till the end of the song. Now let's see about renewable energy. You know, there's so much talk about renewable energy, but when you really go inside it, look at the distribution by the source. Let's go back to the previous slide. Renewable is 12% of the overall. But when you drill down, you notice that 56% of that is hydro. That's dams. That's the federal government. That's FDR's time. You know, that's a bulk of it. And the rest of it, if you combine hydro and wind, look where you are. You are at about 84% of the overall renewable portfolio. Everything else is in that 15, 16%. A lot of it is biomass, whether it's waste or wood. So keep all of these figures in mind when you propose things, and how much time and money and convincing you will need to do to move these things. These things don't move very easily. There's a huge economy that's dependent on them, jobs and infrastructure and all of that. So keep that in mind. Now let's look at the electricity price, retail electricity price per kilowatt hour. I'm talking about, you know, those bands. It's the first band, the lowest band. It only goes up from here. Notice that in areas that are hit a lot by natural disasters, the price seems to be a little higher. Notice in high urban areas where there's a lot of push for clean energy, again, the price is high. And see where it's low. It's low in the middle of the country where it's sparsely populated and heavily dependent on coal and hydro and nuclear. Then you see low price. And this trend is not about to go away. It's only going to get worse. And the reason why is because when you have intermittent renewable energy, like solar and wind, you have to provide grid support services for it. It's not a la carte. In order for it to be provided in a stable way, the utilities in that area have to provide support services. That adds to the cost. So you can say I've got grid parity, but you really don't until you take the total cost of ownership. And what that is doing is it's driving up the price, especially in the New England area where they're saying, oh, we're going to do away with nuclear and we're just going to move to, it'll become a virtual power plant. I'm like, all right, nice, very nice. But please don't forget Kirchhoff's law and Ohm's law while you're on that beautiful journey to nirvana. The challenge here is that we have to take the total cost of ownership of all fuel sources and look at the total ecological damage to this planet from cradle to grave before we start assigning a proper price for fuel. We can't just take it at the point of delivery and say, oh, it's going to be so sweet now, because there's some river in China that's getting polluted by the renewable energy technology that we're building there. You can't just ignore that just because it's not in your backyard. So the United States price is a report card because price ultimately reflects the cost, right? There's a certain return on investment, so there is a base price that's showing what it costs to deliver that service. And this diversity will give you a lot of insight on how you should do business and how you can drive these prices down. Don't ever provide technology or service that's going to drive this price up. If you're going to do that, quit while you're ahead. Don't approach the utilities with stuff that's going to increase the price. There's no appetite for it. It's that simple. I don't care how exciting your technology is. It's a non-starter. So think about the total cost of ownership and how you can bring the cost down. That's why I'm spending this time on this slide. It's a report card of the country, and it shows a lot of political, social, and economic trends in the country. This shows you a forecast, and notice going from 2016 to 2040, there isn't much change in terms of nuclear. As you see, it's going from 10% to 8%. Well, one will argue that if most of the current nuclear fleet is going to retire in the next 10, 15 years, how is it going to be in such a large percentage in 2040? That means new nuclear power plants have to be built in this country. So if EIA is predicting this, and that's DOE, it makes sense that they're investing in small modular reactors and more advanced technologies, because you cannot have this pie distribution without making that investment. Same thing with coal. Notice it's going down from 23% to 16%, and natural gas is picking up some of that. But the challenge is that you can't just do coal the same old way. So now they're going towards gasification, combined cycle, and carbon capture and sequestration. All these various ways need to be brought in order to reduce the carbon footprint of coal. Because I do think that there's going to be some kind of a tax on carbon in the future. Now, whether it's called tax or whether it's other ways, but states are going to start implementing it. It is general knowledge now in the scientific community that this carbon is causing climate change. You can argue it for or against, it doesn't matter. What matters is that it's going to have an impact on your wallet. And therefore, having a proper mix is very important. There is no single silver bullet. No one source of energy in the future is going to solve our problem. It's a portfolio. That's the key thing to understand, that even another 24 years, nothing is going to change. Now let's look at the distribution as a function of time, and you begin to see that, yeah, renewables do increase. Natural gas naturally is going up. It's cheap, it's abundant, it's available. Coal is being reduced somewhat. Nuclear kind of stays stable. But still at 18%. Remember, it was 8% of the power and 18% of the energy. So that means that it has very high availability, just like coal, going from 16% of the power to 39% of the energy. That's a huge multiplier. All right. Now let's talk about how the country is divided and what these organizations like Bonneville Power or Western Area Power Administration or Southwest or Southeast, these are organizations that are government-owned, and their main aim is to bring the power that's generated from a lot of the dams, the nuclear power plants, and other sources to the distribution companies. And they primarily support public and co-op type organizations, but some IOUs also buy electricity from them. So that's how these power marketing administrations have been created, and there are 4 of them, and you see the regions in which they are covered. I'm going to get into the ISO and RTOs. So you see the listing here of ISOs and RTOs in the United States. And you can see our California Independent System Operator, CAL-ISO, is there. ERCOT, New Brunswick is in Canada, just like Alberta. And then you have your New York Independent System Operator. Amongst the RTOs, you've got the ISO New England, Mid-Continent, MISO, Ontario, and PJM. A lot of people know about PJM because it's in the Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Maryland area. Southwest Power Pool, which is in the southeastern part of the country. And then you have these non-RTO transmission organizations. One is called Columbia Grid, and the other one is called Northern Tier. And I've listed the utilities that are involved in these organizations. So they're not full-fledged RTOs, but they do a lot of those functions. And it'd be good for you to research those and understand. And these are good markets to do business in because there are a lot of issues on interstate communication of electricity. So if you can help them, I think that you will find a very willing audience. Here is a geographical map that shows you where they are, and you can see SPP and ERCOT, CAL-ISO, all of them are represented on this nice diagram. Now, the middle part, just because that area doesn't cover it, doesn't mean that they have no oversight on their transmission. It's just that they are not very heavily populated areas, and they are usually managed by the relationships between these entities. Or there are some local areas that will cooperate with these ISO RTOs to provide service in those areas. I'm talking about to manage the transmission line. I'm going to now get into a little bit about the economics of the various types of utility. As you can see, the revenue distribution, again, disproportionately with IOUs, but we're talking about a $366 billion market. That is huge. So just to give you an idea, that entire stimulus funding was $4.3 billion over 3-4 years. And we're talking $366 billion a year. You can do a lot. There are lots of zeros there. The question is, how do you do it intelligently and with a multiplier effect so that this $366 billion could one day become $1 trillion? Why am I saying that? Electrified societies are inherently more efficient. If you have a chemical-based process or a fuel-based process, or you have an electrical-based process, the electrical process is more efficient. There have been studies done at the Electric Power Research Institute. And I'm not saying this because I want to encourage utilities just to sell more kilowatt hours. That's not what this is about. I'm saying if you have a choice between a fuel-based or chemical-based process or an electrical process, try a stove, simple stove to heat up something. If you use natural gas, is very cheap, so you can burn it, but just think of all the BTUs that you're burning, most of it is being used to warm up the room. And in the Northeast, you will actually see places that have propane stoves that act like heaters. So, okay, if that's your goal, wonderful. But if it's just to heat up a cup, you know, to make tea or something, you're not going to waste all that heat. So electric appliances are quite efficient, because, and you've seen that with the electric kettle, how quickly the water gets hot. So if we move to an increasingly electrified society, it'll be more efficient, it'll be better for the sustainability. plus you decouple the fuel from the electricity. Now you can start thinking of creative ways of producing electricity to have the minimal impact on the planet. And that decoupling doesn't occur if you use chemical-based processes or fuel-based processes. I'm talking like propane, butane, or you do things with acid washing and things like that. So look at this table and you begin to see how many organizations are involved in the three types, how disproportionate the distribution of the revenue is. But then look at the size of the customers. A typical IOU has 400,000 customers. That's like the middle of the distribution, as opposed to 2,000 for publicly owned and 13,000 for co-ops. So very different priorities, very different kind of demographics. When you have 400,000 people anywhere, there'll be a lot of diversity in those people. In smaller communities with 2,000 or 13,000, less so. So the issues are different. You see the distribution of the revenue, customers, and kilowatt-hour sales. I'm showing you this so that it will reinforce in your mind why so much attention is always paid on IOUs and the Edison Electric Institute, that is the trade association, and FERC and NERC, who are always focused on those big players. I get it, but it doesn't mean that that's where all the action is. And my hope is that as experts, as subject matter experts, and as providers of products and services, you look at the entire market. Because there can be a huge multiplier effect if you focus on co-ops and munis and do something substantial with real results. They'll have repercussions over the whole industry. It's almost like using a lever, right? Archimedes concept. All right. Now let's go in a little bit and see the breakdown by residential, commercial, industrial. No surprise here. Many of you know that there is almost an even distribution between the three sectors. And this is billions of kilowatt hours of electricity consumed. And you see that industrial is slightly less than commercial and residential. Again, very disproportionately in favor of IOUs. No surprise there. Here it tells you a little bit about the infrastructure and something about the assets in these various types of utilities and how much equity is contained in the various utilities. And you will have these slides, so you will be able to review these numbers. I'm going to keep moving. Now let's get into the top 20 IOUs. So amongst the investor-owned utilities, these are the top 10, and this is by market cap. And you can see this if you go to any finance or website, you can see what their market cap is. So they are publicly traded, and this is the value of their stock. These are the next 10, and you can see quite a distribution around the country. And these are, in some cases, they're holding companies, because that's the one that has the sticker on, or the ticker on New York Stock Exchange or whatever market that they're exchanging on. Important thing to understand is that all of these utilities, whether small or large, are important for the infrastructure because they're serving very different communities across the geography. So whether you're a California-based company or a Texas-based company or a New York-based company, it doesn't matter. Get on a plane and fly and meet utilities across the country. Because just because someone is near you doesn't mean the need for your product and service is right there. And I'm going to get into that in my future talks as I profile these utilities and show you their priorities and things like that, to save you the time from clicking through pages and pages trying to figure out what the posture of a particular utility is. Now let's get into the public power and look at the list. This is by megawatt hour sold. Now some of these names you will know, but some you'll go, Santee Cooper? Puerto Rico Electric Power Authority? Right? Lower Colorado River Authority, one would think it's in Colorado, but no, it's in Texas. Because the Colorado River runs in Texas. Seattle City and Light everyone knows because Bill Gates lives nearby, right? New York Power Authority people know because it's a very populous state. Salt River Project because they show up in all the smart grid conferences. You know, there are ways we know some people, but there are others that we don't know that are still pretty large. And when you sell this many megawatts of power, you have an IT department. You have cybersecurity issues. You have resiliency issues. This is serious business. So don't forget all of them. And then the next 20 here. Again, some of them you know, JEA, you know, Jacksonville, it used to be Jacksonville Electric Authority. It's now just called JEA. SMUD, everyone knows SMUD, very active. We're a big recipient of Smart Grid Fund in Sacramento. Austin Energy, who doesn't know Austin Energy? Smart Grid 1.0, 2.0, 3.0. It just, they were the pioneers. But there's Intermountain Power Agency in Utah. That's also important. Or Memphis Light, Gas, and Water in Tennessee. Omaha PPD. So just keep these in mind. This is the day I'm celebrating heroes that are not normally celebrated. There are people who go to work to keep this infrastructure going. Don't forget them. All right. I'm not going to go through all these 8 slides in great detail, but I wanted to show you how many co-ops exist that have at least 49,000 customers. I said 49 because I started with 50, but they were like 49,600 something, and I said, that doesn't seem fair. Let me include them. And I have 8 slides with names of those utilities, but I'm going to focus on, in bold, on those that have over 100,000 customers. Intermountain REA, Colorado. Clay Electric Co-op, Florida, Keystone Heights. Sumter Electric Co-op, Florida again. Whitla Coochie River Electric Co-op in Dade City, Florida. And Cobb Electric Membership Corporation. So the NRECA website is amazing. You can actually go into their member directory, and you can pull by state and in the United States, all the co-ops that are members of NRECA. Now, why am I picking members of NRECA? It gives you an excuse to reach out to them. And because they are represented, all of these utilities are represented by NRECA, you can go to one organization and quickly learn what the priorities of their members are. So that when you go, you're proactively thinking about how you can sell your products and services to these co-ops. Moving along, Greystone Power Corporation, Georgia, Jackson EMC, Georgia, Sony EMC, Cumming, Georgia. All of these are over 100,000, and I bolded them on purpose so that you can see. Dixie Electric Membership Corporation, Baton Rouge, Louisiana, Southern Maryland Electric Co-op. Now, people will know about this. Why? Because it's very close to DC. See, whenever you're near a big metro area, people know the co-ops and the munis. But away from a major metro area, people don't know. And notice that where there's a lot of farming and open areas, there are a lot more co-ops. Did you notice that I went right past California? There was not one co-op with more than 50,000 people? Interesting. Dakota Electric Association, Energy United, North Carolina, South Central Power, Lancaster, Ohio, Middle Tennessee EMC, CoServe Electric, Corinth, Texas. And it's nice to, I'm saying their names, they probably have never heard it in a webinar at a national level. So this probably is the first time, unless it's an NRECA meeting and there's a speaker from there, who is going to talk about these? These are the unsung heroes. They provide electricity in some of the most remote parts of the country. And they also need help. All right. So now I'm going to get into a little bit about the financial health of the utilities. This shows you the market cap in increasing order on the top 20. And you saw that in a tabular form earlier. And you see quite a spread nationally. All the big players, of course, are there: Duke Energy, PG&E, Southern California Edison, Xcel. All of those are there. American Electric Power. Most of these names you would have heard of because they are the big players. So keep this in mind. But now let's move a little deeper. Look at the cash reserves. The one with the biggest cash reserve has a lot of global investments, AES and NRG. And NRG is a power market. It's not even an investor-owned utility. They have lots of assets. They've just been buying up nationally. You can go to Carlsbad, California, and you'll see a solar panel and a charger for EVs. So NRG is everywhere. They have natural gas. They are into solar and wind and different things. But look at the cash reserves. Now, why am I showing you this? When you go to sell a product or service and you want a short sales cycle, you better look at the cash reserve. Because long sales cycle, where you get involved in a rate case, and then you go to the Public Utility Commission and you say to the with the IOU, we want to make this investment in this infrastructure. Then they give you relief on the rate, right? They allow you to put a surcharge on your bill to pay off that investment. That's different. But if you want to quickly go in and sell something, you better look at their cash, because otherwise you'll have to wait. So you see how little cash is in the middle of this graph? And then start looking at those people and start thinking of Hurricane Sandy and all kinds of natural disasters, and then you wonder why their cash reserves are low. Well, they've had to deal with a lot of stuff, and that's where the cash goes. So keep that in mind. Let's move on. Debt to equity ratio. Now, by the way, do you know how I put these graphs together? I went into every company's Yahoo Finance financial detail, and I picked out these variables. There is no graph like this anywhere. I couldn't find one. And I'm sure you'd have to pay some market research firm lots of money to do this. But I'm doing this on purpose. I'm trying to make you all think and have a multiplier effect and get in and do business with the utility industry across the board, all kinds of utilities at a national level, to increase the gross domestic product associated with the electric sector. That's my mission. And I figured out that unless I provide you free information to make this happen, it's not going to happen. We cannot covet this information. It has to be there for you to make decisions. Now, anyone who has studied finance knows that high debt to equity ratio means that you're using outside markets, borrowing and doing all kinds of stuff for your infrastructure. In other words, you're not using the cash generated from the stockholder money. Otherwise, the debt to equity ratio would be closer to 1. When it's huge like this, 150, 200, 250, it shows that utilities are borrowing a lot of money to do infrastructure projects. Now, when they borrow, the rating of their sector is very important. You know that AAA, AA, like batteries and ratings, right? They go together. Then there's triple B, B, double B, single B. The problem is any shifting of the rating can have a huge impact on the financing of the debt when the interest rate changes. So high debt to equity ratio is a tight rope walk. As long as the rope is taut and you've got that big stick and you're walking across it, it's fine. But I'll tell you, with all this distributed energy resources, you know, that whole distributed generation and new markets and all of that, you know what it's doing? It's creating uncertainty for the electric sector in the minds of investors. So they are saying there may not be as good a bet to give them money in the future. And as a result of that, the interest rate on the money they borrow goes up, and it's hard to maintain such debt-to-equity ratios because it affects cash flow. You know the difference between your operating margin and your net profit? That difference is taxes and interest. That's the difference between the two. You never thought I'd be talking about finance here, huh? Well, I'll tell you, I figured it out. It's not the technology. It's the money that's making all the difference. And all of us technology connoisseurs think that if we can write a better program and we can give a better GUI, that we're going to make more money. No, unless you understand the health of the utility industry and learn how to engage in a constructive way with them, you're not going to succeed in a big way. You may make some quick wins initially, but there's no sustainability till you link with these figures. So my suggestion is that when you offer products and services, try to help reduce the debt to equity ratio by not charging exorbitant amounts without realizing a real profit from it. And I'm going to talk about that in my concluding remarks also. Now here we have a comparison of the revenue and debt. Again, I went into Yahoo Finance and I found these data points. And you see that they're carrying a lot of debt compared to the revenue that they're producing. Now, these things are not related to each other, but the reason why I'm putting it on the graph to give you a sense of proportion. That imagine borrowing as much as you're earning. You know, these are the debts that are on the financial statement. So it's a big part of IOUs to borrow money, do big capital infrastructure projects, hire people, consultants, grow your workforce, all of that. Wonderful. But if there's uncertainty in the market, it can have a huge ripple effect on this industry, and especially these big IOUs. So they have to walk very carefully in this jungle. There are all kinds of predators around from a financial perspective. So as they say, handle with care. And do not try this at home. All right, this shows you the stability of the stock. You don't see this with high-tech companies, do you? Where the current and the 200-day follow so closely. That shows confidence. But I'm telling you, if you read the Edison Electric Institute paper that came out recently about DER and the new business models and how that's going to affect the electric sector, it's a good read. You should read that because the author focuses on these financials and talks about how uncertainty about investments realizing their full value, in other words, having stranded costs, can change the outlook towards the electric sector and how that could impact their ability to borrow. And since so much of their business model depends on borrowing, based on the debt to equity ratio I showed you, you can begin to understand why the EI paper is pointing at something that needs to be thought of by these big utilities and think of new business models to follow. And there's a white paper that we are producing from CMG Consulting that should be coming out in the next week that will talk about some creative strategy that utilities can embark on so that that nightmare scenario doesn't occur 5 years or 10 years down the road, where DER is competing with the utility. I fundamentally reject that. I don't think DER should compete with the existing utility industry. Much like I don't think biotech should compete with chemical-based companies in the medical industry. And as you saw, many of the big chemical-based companies bought out the biotech companies, and they have a portfolio now, and they sell some chemical-based and some biotech products. Utilities could do the same. They can provide distributed energy resources and provide economies of scale that are not normally associated with DER. Could be a part of their franchise. So it's all about creative thinking. But these types of stable numbers that I'm showing you it can be changed if the perception in the market changes. So it's important to look at that. Look at the operating margin and the net profit. So I told you the difference between the two is the interest and the taxes. And this is a way of, this is like a report card of the management of these companies. Because the ideal thing would be that your operating margin is high and your profit is high. Then you're doing things well. If your operating margin is high, but your net profit is low. That means you are putting too much money into interest and taxes. And that's why it's creating this big gap. So the aim should be provide products and services to utilities that can help reduce this gap between the operating margin and the net profit. And the way you can do that is by making them borrow less, so that as the interest rates go up, they're not spending too much money in interest finance. In other words, find creative ways of making them more efficient. That's the best way of increasing the profit. Here are some of the constraints that IOUs, munis, and co-ops have to consider. The first one is there's definitely a reduction at the meter. And the reason is they're three-pronged. One is that there's a slowdown in the economy. Now one will say, Irfan, what do you mean slowdown in the economy? Dow Jones has been hitting higher, higher, and higher. Well, I'm talking about stuff that actually uses electricity. When you have 20% of infrastructure, you know, the goods sitting idle in America, not producing, factories sitting idle, and you have an effective unemployment rate of 20%. When I mean by 20% unemployment, I mean people who want a full-time job but cannot find it. There is lost productivity as a result of that 20% sitting idle and 20% of the people not having full-time work. That is having an impact on the meter collections. When I say meter collection, I'm talking commercial, industrial, residential, all combined. I'm not just talking residential. We may even see an uptick in residential because unemployed people stay home and consume more electricity. Sure, but overall I'm saying. So that's one of the problems. Then you have all the PVs going up everywhere, and they're creating these net zero homes. That's reducing the collection. And the third one is that the energy efficiency schemes that they finance through rebate programs and everything are having an effect. It's almost like Lee Iacocca from Chrysler Corporation. Remember years ago he said, if you can find a better car, buy it. And people did. So if you're going to provide a lot of energy efficiency schemes, then expect the meter collection to go down. All right, now we have an increased environmental regulation at local, state, and federal level. Why is that driving up operational costs? It's forcing utilities to produce clean energy. And clean energy sometimes with the more advanced technologies is more expensive, and they have to subsidize it. That costs money. Then there is this national directive. You know, February 2013, Obama comes up and says the electric sector is vulnerable. Go out and secure it. Well, that was easy for a law major to say. Now the poor engineers and the IT people and the networking people are freaking out, going, what does that mean? How do you secure from hazards that we don't even know? It's always easy to do it with known ones, but a lot of the attacks are asymmetric attacks where we don't know the profile. So it costs a lot of time and money and infrastructure reorganization to have that situational awareness. It's having an impact. Stringent NERC, you know, counting every little fine thing. Now, I think that organization is great and FERC is doing a great job, but it's almost like the Human Genome Project. It takes a lot of effort to be compliant, and the versions keep coming out. Version 3, version 4, version 5. And we're now making version 4 law. 5 is still being reviewed. So just when you're done with one, then there's the next one to deal with. So that is consuming a lot of time and energy. And remember, I said 300 megawatts or higher, you're in the NERC-FERC area. So you got to deal with it. And they can be so invasive that they'll even tell you what kind of antivirus you have to have on your laptop of your employees. I mean, it's so arbitrary. It goes way up in 50,000 foot high and then down to being so prescriptive. So it is taking these poor organizations by a storm. And talk to any compliance person at a utility. I don't care. IOU, Muni, Co-op, they'll tell you their stories. Go to an Energy Sec conference. There's one coming up, I think, middle of the year, August, I think. Go to one of them, and you'll see lots of these people. And they have aged. They have aged a lot in the last 5, 6 years. I've seen them. I can give you verification on that. So this is consuming them. And then you have natural disasters, one after another. Whether it's a hurricane, tornado, whatever it is, flood, all of that is causing problems. Ice storms, there are these Spanish named storms that come from Chicago and walk all the way through DC. What is that called? Verdechi, what is that name? Huh? That it came from Chicago and went through DC about a year ago, and it high winds and trees. Derechos, that's it. I knew it was Spanish in its sounding. Yes. So it was like a bulldozer. It was like God took a bulldozer and went for 700 miles. All the trees fell on all the poles. And it was huge. I mean, just ask Dominion Resources in Virginia, or ask Pepco, or any of these utilities. First Energy in Ohio. Serious, serious problems. And then the federal government saying, you got to put resiliency into the system. And they go, yeah, we're securing it. No, not security, resiliency. Then they go, oh, yeah, we're putting firewall. No, resiliency. So what resiliency really means is that if a system is attacked, how do you recover from it? See, putting more cybersecurity does not create resiliency. That just means it's a higher fence. If they cross it, the question is, what do you do then? So that's what utilities are now primarily focused on, is how do you build resiliency into the system? How do you reconfigure software-defined networking? Those kinds of concepts are coming up. How do you create stuff in the cloud that you can quickly move to? Move your SCADA over there for a little while because you're worried that down here it's all malware, and then bring back that image. All of those. And then how do you go back to a normal function? And then aging workforce. Serious, serious problem. In the next 6 years, we're going to lose 62% of our workforce. There are special organizations set up. There's this consortium for energy workforce development. It's a combination of EEI and a few other organizations that are looking at this issue, because when those experienced people go away, the question is, who's going to replace them? And we need new skills because of all this ICT stuff that is coming on to the grid. So keep all of this in mind. Now, I'm going to provide you some recommendations based on everything I've spoken about in the last hour. One is, walk a mile in their shoes. And when I say there, I mean the utilities. When I say utilities, I'm not just talking about PG&E and SCE and SDG&E and SMUD. I'm talking about IOUs, munis, and co-ops as a whole, as an entity that you've seen in my presentation. Don't pitch technology or consulting or service just for the sake of it, to boost your own ego, to make your bank account look better. It's a short-lived strategy. If you want to engage in this business and make a career out of it, you have to understand their issues and speak their language. That's what my aim is. And by the way, I'm not being sponsored for this presentation. No utility has a contract with me. I'm just speaking as a concerned American citizen, because what I'm concerned about the most is that the pie is getting smaller. And the number of people who are skilled is growing, and they're all jumping on that same pie. And I'm suggesting that if you use your innovative ideas and engage with the utilities in a constructive way, you can actually grow the pie. So you can still have your little sliver, but the area of that sector is going to grow. You see? Instead of trying to force a larger market share, make the pie bigger. And the pie bigger means use innovation to increase the productivity of utilities so that they can deal with all of their constraints and still deliver electricity safely, reliably, and cost-effectively. The next one is show to the client how the product or service will reduce operational costs. Don't keep talking about increasing the revenue. Revenue to a utility means little. Profitability is important. You know why? Let me show you. If it's an investor-owned utility, what does profitability mean? Return on shareholder value. If you show more profitability in a city, they can use some of that for the general fund because they're short on the pension plans and everything. So it offsets their cost. And it'll also reduce the rates on the consumer. Co-op, the same way it'll reduce rates. And it'll give more money for future R&D. So don't try to increase the revenue. Don't use that metric. Use the metric of how you can reduce operational costs with the same workforce, with the same infrastructure, making it more efficient. Then you're going to get an audience. Never speak about replacing labor. You know, Silicon Valley has this odd habit where people are just this obnoxious nuisance in the way that if they could just be replaced with a bunch of automated systems, life would be so great. Our industry is a people industry. People are known as Bob, John, Mary, you know, and there are long relationships. That's how you get business in this business. So don't try to impress them with silicon. Stay focused on carbon. It's the same, you know, group in the periodic table, but focus on carbon. It is people. Silicon is just a means to get to the carbon. By carbon, I mean human life, not the way Spock talked about it. Carbon units, if I recall. All right. Again, you want to show, because they're a dwindling workforce, you want to show how that person can be more productive and do more things. That's very, very important. The next one is that, you know, when you have these total resource cost ratios of benefit to cost, that's what the Public Utility Commission gets in their rate cases. Please don't talk about the ratio as a number. Talk about it as a quantifiable numerator and denominator, and be able to trace it back to the roots of what constitutes cost and what constitutes benefit. There is so much of this three-card Manhattan shuffle going on this ratio. That's how we sold smart meters. It was the three-card shuffle, Manhattan style. Have you ever been subject to that? You never pick the one which has the right card. It's always the other one. So the issue, and a lot of consulting companies make tons of money making these cases with the utilities. Oh, we need smart meters, we need smart meters. You know, it turned out to be just a glorified automated meter reading plan that munis and co-ops have had for 15, 20 years. Because we are taking a small fraction of what the smart meter can really do and turning it into money. All we're doing really is replacing the poor guy who used to come read the meter and, yeah, remote connect, disconnect. But the challenge was that we have the stranded investment of billions of dollars that we're not leveraging. Are we using the meter data to do SCADA operations? No. Are we using the meter data to figure out what the capacity issues are going to be? Some, yes, some, no. Because the level of networking and the detail of the information is not even standard across the utility. And I am a little upset about that because smart meters have a huge potential, huge promise, and we're just scratching the surface. And if we keep throwing technology at utilities that they use only 5 or 10%, it reminds me of the network management industry that I was a part of 10, 15 years ago. Remember HP OpenView and Cabletron Spectrum and LAN Sentry and LAN this and Optivity? What happened? They sat on shelves. CDs sat on shelves because people got upset. It didn't work. They would put it on the shelf and say, I don't want to deal with it. It kept crashing my system. We don't want to do that with smart grid technology. So please keep that in mind about engaging the proper numerator and denominator in the ratio and make sure it's greater than 1. DOA means dead on arrival. So speculative ratios based on fancy marketing collateral in glossy PDF documents is not going to go anywhere. Because that guy who's sitting, the bean counter at the utility, is going to say, okay, show me your number. Well, you know, I have this regression analysis, this and that. No. They don't like that fancy talk. Keep it simple. All right. Now, look at the utility cash situation, debt equity ratio, and all of these things, and then look for opportunities where you can create a public-private partnership. It's really, really important for you to engage in constructive dialogue with the utilities where you know there's some money available at the state level or at the federal level, and you combine it with some investment that they make. When you go to a PUC together like that, they'll be very impressed. That's exactly what it means to help, because it's the tax money that's coming in through those grants. So if you can show that you can partner with a grant money and do something, it's wonderful. Also, I've said this over and over again in this presentation, don't keep targeting the large utilities. Look at some of the challenges with the large utilities when you do business with them. And I have the battle scars to prove it. I used to be part of the Electric Power Research Institute. I used to manage the research portfolios of smart metering and cybersecurity for 3 years, and many of these large utilities were there. One was that the sales cycle is very, very long. Be ready, 12 months, 18 months, don't see a purchase order. Be ready to go into their labs till the cows come home. Bake-offs, testing, endlessly. Oh, but you got the big brand name. Yes, but be measured in your strategy. The next one is industry competition may be stiffer. Everybody and their brother, any top 100 integrator is going to be there. Who doesn't want to be in a nice metro area working with 7-figure purchase orders? Everyone loves them. Internal staff may have their own vision. Now, that can be a good thing or it could be a bad thing. It could be a good thing if they're really visionary and forward-looking. Wonderful. You climb on the bandwagon, you go with them. But if they're hard-headed and they're not willing to learn and change, that could be a huge impediment for you. That can lengthen your sales cycle. It may even throw you out because the other competitor who's listening to what they're saying may get along, even though they may end up with a suboptimal solution. But it's okay. They'll get the job. And the regulatory constraints may make rapid changes more difficult to realize. All these big utilities are under a lot of constraints. So get that situational awareness. The next thing is that 80% of the market is IOUs, but munis and co-ops also have real needs. And it's better to go after the small to medium-sized utility and give them something tangible that they can realize. The sales cycle will be shorter. They'll be with you. You can consult with NRECA and APPA, those trade associations that are with them, to make sure that you're in alignment with their sector as a whole nationally, and you will be able to close the deal. And increasingly, vendors are realizing that, and you see how the conferences, the trade conferences of munis and co-ops are getting filled up, whereas a few years ago, it was only their own friends and family. People are realizing that there is a potential there. So don't be taken by 20%. Remember, it's 20% of $366 billion. So don't worry about how big they are, but keep it within reason. I would recommend go after the co-ops with 50,000 people or more. Go after these top 20 munis because they'll have a trickle-down effect on the smaller one. And then they'll call you and say, hey, I heard you did this with Santee, or I heard you did this with Intermountain. Can you come and do this? They'll be calling you. Remember that. Again, reach out to these trader associations. They have a lot of valuable information on their website. Plus, they can also guide you and tell you, look, you need to get your act together in this way, or I really think this is good. They'll be your coaches. So don't ignore them. These trade associations are very important. And then, of course, explore ways in which you can get these federal agencies and the states to work with you in real public-private partnerships. My problem is I've seen one too many public-private partnerships go the following way. The federal agency issues an award. There's celebration by the recipient. They show up. They're invited to all the major conferences, and they always get that corner seat where they get to speak because they're the big recipient, and they're consuming and billing and billing and billing. And then a point comes where the money runs out. And just like mice jumping off a sinking ship, boom, gone. What happened to the public-private partnership? I don't know. The public part is still there. The private is gone. So this model has to go because we cannot, as I said, keep borrowing from international donors for this facade of a public-private partnership. A real public-private partnership is like the Apollo mission. That's a public-private partnership, where for 10 years we were preparing to go to the moon, and look at the electronics industry that has flourished because of miniaturization. That's a public-private partnership. You want to know another example? The Human Genome Project. Again, money was invested, or stem cell research. Look at the way the private sector comes around that investment and multiplies it. And what do we do in the electric sector? Wait for the next handout. That has to fundamentally change, and that is the most important message in this presentation and in the series that I will continue. I'm going to focus now on individual utilities and show you what their priorities are. And I'm not getting any calls from them. It's just publicly available information, because my aim is to make you all constructive and productive, whether you're a utility person engaging with vendors or you're a vendor trying to sell a service, because that good relationship between the two is going to make all the difference. So at this point, I have about 15 minutes that I can open it up for Q&A. I hope that you found this presentation informative, and the data, of course, will be available to you, and engage with me in a dialogue by email, and I'll be happy to respond to you. I'm trying to act as coach because I've spent so many years engaging with utilities of all stripes that I've learned that some things don't work and other things do. So why should you have to go out there and learn it all over again? I'm just sharing this experience with you. So at this time, what I'm going to do is bring down the question and then see what people are saying. Oh, they've been saying a lot. Okay, I can hear you, sounds fine, competing with World Cup. Okay, loud and clear, World Cup. Okay, will presentation recording be available by webinar attendees? Yes, it will be. And for later, how many miles of distribution lines do you think? I was trying to get that number. It is available. I think the NRECA shows how many miles they have of their distribution, but I will get that information. I was looking for it. I couldn't find it, but it's at least an order of magnitude greater, because naturally it goes into the cities on multiple streets. And then the next question is, this is great stuff, Irfan. Looking forward to receiving the deck. This is info that many of us know, but this really puts it into a relevant context. Oh, well, thank you, Mike, and coming from you, that's a real compliment. And this, but this really puts it in, okay, thanks for providing it, all right? And then we have, who do we have? Bruce Hamilton, who says, this is the most informative and helpful webinar I have ever joined. Thanks. Oh, wow. The audience here was harder on me. They were making strange faces at me. Okay, replacing labor is really not an issue. Compensation for the loss of labor, aging workforce is the issue. So no one should be talking about replacing or displacing labor, from Mike Morrow. Exactly, yeah. Make the most of the people that are there and bring up a skilled workforce that is going to be replacing them as these people retire or their business needs change. Okay, by the way, in the next wave, siliconization will replace electromechanical devices, not people, but that siliconization will allow us to operate safely and efficiently with the smaller staffs that remain after the boomers retire. Agreed. Irfan, excellent job again. That's Brian Davison from Austin Energy. And what are your thoughts on international opportunities? Good webinar. I think internationally the priorities are very different. Here we have a saturated market with a highly industrialized society trying to find wiggle room. So it's much harder to do business in the United States. But in other parts of the world where infrastructure is growing for the first time, it is amazing. The opportunities are amazing. And again, don't go for Western Europe. Again, saturated society, highly industrialized. But places like Australia are industrialized, but they're making big commitments to moving to a renewable portfolio and all that, that requires a lot of infrastructure upgrades. And so there. In the Indian market, especially now that we have a businessman for Prime Minister, right? We're going to have a lot of money invested. I think there's going to be like 200 million meters, smart meters in India at the peak. Now, okay, you have to overcome the bureaucracy and all that, but there's a huge potential there. Plus, there's skilled labor available. You combine skilled labor with the demand and a growing economy, good formula. Parts of the Middle East now, you may think, oh my God, how could I go there? No, there are some areas that are growing amazingly and in North Africa there are some areas, and they're also in the Middle East, especially in the Gulf region. There's a lot of move towards advanced technology. So internationally, opportunities galore. But learn at least 10, 15 words in the language of the country you go to. That will go a long way. And learn how to sit cross-legged. I'm practicing. All right. Yeah. So that was international. And what are your thoughts? Okay. Great presentation. Thanks. When you spoke of resiliency as a need of the government, is that inclusive of redundancy? Okay. Again, difference between redundancy and resiliency. Redundancy helps improve reliability. So if there is one thing that fails, you've got the other thing. I'm talking resiliency is another thing. Resiliency is when someone is actively attacking you. How do you contain them? And then operate around them while you're in this degraded state. Take care of them, shut them out, and then recover. If you have redundancy, you're only slowing the pace of the attacker until they figure out the next pipe, and then they try to compromise. So please don't make the two be the same in your mind. Okay. Again, next, wow, I'm getting a lot of things here. This is great. All right, so some of it is going back. All right. You're a tremendous asset to the industry. Thank you, Brian. And then there is Omar says, Irfan, thanks for the webinar. How do progressive utilities like SDG&E, HECO, Duke, Carolinas that have been aggregating and managing DER, how does this fit into your utility model? I said this earlier, that utilities have a unique opportunity to provide their economies of scale on DER in a way an independent power producer cannot. Because their bureaucracy is so large, they can absorb that. And they can have a franchise model where they put up a bunch of DERs, but the business layer is common over it. So that gives you the best of both worlds. You have distributed, so you have more reliability to deliver electricity to the local customers, but you're not facing the problem of small organizations. Because you have a large organization, they're very efficient in their business process, they can deploy it. The equivalent of it would be, you know how you have an independent gas station as opposed to a Chevron or a Shell? That's the difference. That the Shell or Chevron one, they create a little franchise with the guy who actually owns the physical facility, but a lot of the bureaucracy is shared from the Shell organization. Or like a McDonald's franchise, as opposed to a standalone burger joint. So utilities have the benefit that because they're so large, they can use their business layer across these DERs and compete with the IPP or community type thing. And you will see eventually that that will start happening in these progressive utilities, and then other utilities are going to catch on. It requires some rethink of how the bureaucracy is set up because they are thinking of centralized generation. I think that there will always be play for centralized generation for the sake of grid stability. But DER can be a commodity that utilities can play as opposed to fighting. All right. And then the next is Bravo. We should also change our focus more on the core operations closer to the electron production, delivery, and utilization. I agree. A couple of things there. One is that we're seeing a rapid move from analog technology to digital technology in the power plant. So that is big because there are reliability issues that come when you move from analog to digital. When I say reliability issues come, I mean that when you are going from a connection-oriented network, like circuit switch type thing, to a packetized one, you better have lots of bandwidth available to have the quick response. You have to have redundancy in your systems, have hot swaps and those kinds of things. So it's a complete rethink of the architecture of a network control center of a power plant. And then all this advent of wireless technology, whether it's WiMAX, Wi-Fi, any kind of wireless technology, be careful how you apply it to production systems. Because you've seen sitting at a Starbucks, what happens to your bandwidth, upload and download. It can go all over the place. So you want to make sure that you have secure pipes. And there are many good companies like Cisco Systems, like Aruba Networks, companies like that that are actually thinking about this and providing solutions to overcome the issue of IP being a connectionless service. So I think there's lots of stuff at the production. And also in making the plants more efficient in converting the energy from heat to electricity. So combined heat and power, where you take the waste, the exhaust heat, and put it again in another cycle to add more torque on the turbine, excellent. You can get up 60, 70% efficient. So imagine high temperature natural gas power plant, combined heat and power, as an example. All right. And then we have utilities have very low R&D funds. Isn't the main reason for difficulties in implementation for new technology solutions? This is a chicken and the egg problem. The reason why R&D funds are low is because there's so much focus on production. And any business school will teach you that you have to create a balance between production and production capability. Just like if you had a hen and you were in your house, there are two options you can do. You can chase the hen all day around the house asking for it to lay another egg, or you can feed the hen, and the hen will gladly lay the egg. See the difference between production and production capability? That's what we have to do. To grow the R&D funds, you have to create the rationale for growing the R&D fund. Remember that these utilities have to go back to either their shareholder or their customer, in the case of Muni and Co-op, and justify the expenditure. So if you can show them that through R&D in the long run you're going to save and you'll have a more stable supply of electricity at an affordable price and it will be safe and all of those good things, they're willing to make that investment. How many people move from iPhone 3 to 4 to 5, I don't know where it is now. Why are they doing it? Because they see tangible value. They get to play with more features on Facebook. They get to Twitter like a bird all day long. These things matter to people. We can make the utility industry be like that by showing tangible value. Our problem is our value is always ethereal. It's like fumes, but fancy talk. Get down to basics. Show real value. Just like automobiles showed value to people running around in carriages, or the railroad as opposed to those big trucks with the horse-drawn trucks. It's real value. All right. So let's see if I have any questions. Oh, wow. There are all these questions, too. Oh, my. Do we have any questions here? Or are you all overwhelmed? Okay. So Europe is 2 times the price for gas, and Russia just cut off Ukraine. Yes. We should do the same for cigarettes and alcohol. Wow. Let's do that with a more serious effort, nuclear. Building the electron economy. You are helping to build the electron economy. Oh, derecho, yes. Please elaborate on how utilities could invest in DER on customer premises. I did that. How do you think that, oh, by the way, I think that utilities should buy companies out and then provide this service at customer premise. So it's like wholly owned subsidiary doing the DER stuff. That would be the ideal way, because you can push down all the SAP, so they don't have to buy that $1 million SAP license. So you push down those applets on them, but you let it run as an independent, autonomous entity. because that's when you get the good customer service. I'm not saying utilities don't provide good, but they're used to providing it for a certain type of service. That's the challenge. So if you get a wholly owned subsidiary, that would be the better way. How do you think the current attention on distributed energy resources will actually play out and over what time frame? I think it's a function of showing tangible value. If you can account for the total cost of ownership of DER and show that you can provide electricity at an affordable level with accounting for grid support services, I'm all for it. And you'll find a market and you'll grow. But if you play that 3-card shuffle game I was telling you about, where you push the cost to a later time, it's not going to go over well. There will be a huge blowback. People are very liberal in America when it comes to social mores. But if their wallet gets affected, they become the most conservative people. Have you noticed that? Socially, very liberal. But they'll become almost libertarian when it comes to money. So always keep in mind that when you do something, make sure it helps the bottom line. For the customer, in lower cost of electricity. For the utility, in higher profitability. For the shareholder, in return. Or in the case of a city government, viability. Or in the case of a co-op, sustainability. Okay, what are your thoughts on international opportunities? Good webinar. Okay, we got that. Irfan, thanks for the webinar. How to, okay, we did that. And these were my comments about natural gas. Okay. So I think, wow, and it's 2:02.
I have a question.
Can you come closer and ask?
How about I talk louder? How's that?
Okay.
I have a question, and that is related to all of this. What do you see? Is there anything out there that's going to lead to disruptive change? Because, I mean, a lot of what we're looking at is, almost baby step change right now. But there's got to be something coming out. There's been so much change, in how we look at the market with the way it's changed. Is there one thing that's going to come out that's going to lead to disruptive change?
So the question, in case you didn't hear, is there going to be some disruptive change? And if it is, what is that going to be? I think that the biggest disruptive change that's going to come is going to come in the regulatory side of this business. That is the area that is aching for reform. And I'll tell you why. We are going way ahead in advanced technology, but the regulatory environment is not conducive to take maximum advantage of these technologies, whether it is energy storage, whether it is distributed energy resources of other kinds like solar and wind. What the issue is that even today we are trading electricity at a very high macro level in markets at the highest level. But if you want to sell electricity to your next door neighbor, you cannot legally. This model has to change. So there's going to be a lot of stress that's going to be created, and there'll be lobbies and there'll be political changes. But I think it's almost a generational thing. So as policy makers come into the public utility commissions from the people who I'd say are about 35 or less now, you're going to start seeing that way of thinking coming. It's a generational, and you can see that in the voting patterns on many social aspects in America. I've seen it in 35 years I've been in this country. So nothing short of people changing is going to cause that, but that will be the disruptive change. And I see a lot of microgrids forming as a result of that change in the policy, and nanogrids, which is just nothing more than a bunch of nanogrids coming together to be a microgrid. And the transactions that will occur between them will build resiliency in the system because they will be able to break up into small little fractals, and they will be able to survive in their little fractals. And when they need to come together, they'll come together also. And that's where the best innovative technology, some fuzzy logic, all those advanced concepts are going to come in. So I do think that there will be something disruptive, but there has to be a social change in the thinking of the public utility commissions before that's going to happen. I'll tell you, they mean well. The reason why they're not allowing trading at the lowest level is because they think it will be inherently unstable. That will cause disruption. So to protect people, kind of like the way 911 is there, or ambulance is there, or fire is there. They're not the most efficient, but when someone is dying or there's a fire, they come and they help you out. So we pay a lot of money to have those services. The regulatory thinking is like that we have to protect the consumer. So I think that technologists really have to prove in test beds, in pilots, that these models really work before the policy changes are going to come.
So what's your estimate of the timeline?
Well, the question came up on the timeline to seeing a realization of this world that I'm describing. I said, whenever these 35-year-olds become real policymakers as opposed to the analysts or the orderlies to these people, you're going to see that change. Because they are thinking like this. They are on Facebook. They don't care about privacy. Have you seen the new generation? I mean, it's unbelievable. So it is part of that. You see, there is this concept. I know the CTO at Citrix for mobile apps, and he calls people digital natives and digital immigrants. So our generation are digital immigrants because we come from the analog world and we migrated into the digital world. Then there are digital natives who were born with zeros and ones. I mean, whether it was that Care Fusion machine or Philips machine in the hospital, from the time they were born, they were all zeros and ones. We come from a generation, I remember going to a machine hall and getting cards punched, you know, for my Fortran 77 program. So, I mean, I'm not even analog. I have paper, wooden. So it's a generational thing. And I think that some of these novel ideas of how you distribute electricity and all of that are going to come with that socialization, that need. It's like the way we're doing crowd financing now, or how we use the credit on cell phones as money, or Bitcoin. I mean, if you go ask an average 60-year-old about Bitcoin, he goes, what is that? And why would I want to have virtual money? No, I've got a little clip, and I keep my $100 bills in my clip. And here I keep it in my front pocket so no one can steal it. So it's a cultural change. And there's no wrong or right here. These are values. You cannot argue values. But I do think that technology is begging for a change in the regulatory market in order to grow the market. Otherwise, what will happen is there'll be fissures, there'll be ruptures in the market, then there'll be these little intifadas almost. And you're beginning to see those intifadas or uprisings, whether it's in Alameda or whether it is in Humboldt County, or, you know, you start seeing these people who are just, or Santa Cruz, that cities are saying, oh, I don't need to be part of the grid. I'm just going to do my own thing. And there they can become very democratic. But ultimately, if we want national security, we got to move in sync. We cannot just become a bunch of electrical Bantustans.
I had a couple of digressive questions.
Yeah, and by the way, for those of you who are on the call, we'll just continue this for another 2-3 minutes because I know your time is precious, and I really appreciate you staying on up to now. Go ahead.
Take it offline.
Okay, we'll take it offline. So the next one is going to be in about a month, in which I'm going to start profiling. And profiling, I'm using it in the nicest way possible. Okay? So please don't take the law enforcement interpretation of this kind of profiling. This is profiling of utilities to show you in detail where they are operating, what are some of their priorities, and then giving you some ideas on how to engage in business with them. And then I will see you over there at their headquarters later, when I'm there offering my products and services and you are there offering your products and services. The way I believe in competition, everyone, is that there has to be healthy competition. Healthy competition comes from plentiful information. And then you provide your best product and service and other people do. And then everyone benefits from that. But coveting information and having these little secret deals does not lead to sustainability. So I actually went through this metanoia, or the shifting of the mind, in the last 5-6 years of being in the industry. Like, what is ailing us? Why aren't we growing? And I figured this out, that the coveting of information is what doesn't allow us to grow as an industry. And that's why all of you sit on these calls. I've had over 1,200 of you sit on these calls in the last 2 years, because you're learning from this and applying it in your job. And eventually, you will make money if you're good at something. So learn how to be good at something. I had to do a lot of research. I must have spent about 40 hours putting this presentation together in terms of data. Most of it was data collection. But by distilling it and giving it to you in 1.5 hours, look at the multiplier effect. And look at all of you. 50, 60 of you are now informed. You will have this tool. I think that is shaking the ground. And by shaking, I'm hoping for those disruptive changes where innovation can come in. So I thank you all for participating. And I will send this presentation and this recording in the next day. And you will all have that. And my hope is that we will engage in a dialogue. And there's a point view site that Anto has graciously created for us. Please put your thoughts and comments there. And let's keep this dialogue going even beyond this call until our next webinar on the subject. At this time, I'm going to end the recording. And I appreciate all of your participation. Have a wonderful afternoon.